Okay, John's Dollies shirts. Here is the shirt pattern. Like all the patterns, they have little arrows to show you where you need to add an extra seam allowance if you're using a fray fabric, or if you just want to turn your ends under. When I first did the shirt, I did it out of stretch, quite opposite from the pants, which I did out of wovens. But today I've got a woven fabric for the shirt. So these little arrows here, it says add seam allowance for hemming or turning under if using wovens. The little dotted seam allowances, you need whatever kind of fabric you're using, because that's where you're going to sew the garment together. So again, round the neck, you might need to add a little bit of a seam allowance if you're going to turn it under. It's round, so don't put a huge seam allowance on, or else you get all sorts of horrible puckering. Just a really small rolled hem, which I think I did on the dress video, actually. The front here, you've got 2 panels. You can see the centre front because it's going to overlap and have a fastening. I'll talk a little bit about fastenings later, but what we've got to remember with these dollies is that they are being dressed and undressed by little fingers. So personally, as a child, I found poppers really difficult because I didn't really understand to get my nail in between the 2 metal bits to pull them open, and if you pull too hard the clothes rip and whatever. So I think maybe poppers aren't the greatest, unless maybe you're using those plastic poppers, which can tend to pull open a bit easier. I think they might be a bit big in scale though. So, but what I used was stick-on Velcro. So I didn't have to sew through it, and I had to chop it up because it was quite big Velcro. Chop it up into a couple of pieces. I just did a little bit here and a little bit here, I think. Maybe one in the middle, just like small little amounts of Velcro so that it stays closed when it's on the doll, but it's not difficult to pull open. And with the sticky stuff, you stick it on, you think, that's never going to work. But after 24 hours, it really does stay on. So that's how I did the fastenings. This comes out of what was originally a raglan sleeve pattern. So if you're a bit short on fabric and you're really using tiny scraps, you can do pieces so that that's where the this is the sleeve, this is the back, this is the front. So you could draw a line from here to the neck and draw a line from here to the neck. Put a contrast sleeve in if you wanted to, but remember, if you're cutting those shapes out, you've got to add seam allowance to sew the body and the sleeve back together again. The way to construct that would be very much like the dress, because the dress did have separate sleeves. The shirt doesn't, simply because it's quicker and easier, I think, to have, you know, to be able to just cut out one piece and sew a couple of seams. So here's my cutout. I've not marked anything on it because I can kind of see, I can see what's what. It'd probably be worth marking the centre fronts here and here, and you can see that on the pattern there is a little shape, because when you fold that back, if you didn't have that little shape, it will pop out the top, and that's probably going to happen with mine, because as I've cut it out, I don't know where my little scissors are, and I've struggled with the big scissors to actually get that little shape in. You'll see in a bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sew this up and show you what it looks like. So if I just show you just now how it works. So that's the sleeve. Again, I'm trying to do this one-handed. I've got it on the tripod, but the angle's really weird. See those two go together there, look. And the same on the other side. There, and what we're going to do is we're going to just sew each side round there and down here, and the same on this side and round here. And the sleeves are quite big when you think the arms are sort of really narrow, but because of the shape of the shoulder, if you make these sleeves too narrow, it'll not sit properly. So it's quite a loose fitting shirt. and it looks a very odd shape at the moment. But if I sew these 2 seams up and then show you what it looks like on the doll, you'll see what I mean. So hold your horses and I'll be back. Right, so here it is sewn up. It is in a contrast thread this time, so hopefully you'll be able to see what I've done. Bring it closer. So I've just gone up the sleeve and down the body, or up the body and down the sleeve. I think I did one way and one the other way. And what you will need to do is to snip in to that curve. So that is really close to the stitching but not through it. And then when I turn it around the other way, we have a little shirt. And you can see already now I've turned it around the other way, it doesn't look as big on the sleeves as it did before it was sewn up. Let's turn this one through as well, and I'll put it on the doll. You can see you might need to put a couple of clips in those curves. I hope you can't hear my daughter screaming in the background. She's finished her schoolwork for the day. She's on the phone to her friends, and I think they play online games all in their sort of own, but they chat at the same time. They get very excited. It's quite nice to hear her cheerful, to be honest. But okay, so here's Dolly, and here's the shirt going on. Do. Why won't it go on? Because I'm pulling the shirt instead of the arm. Do. Okay. So you can see that actually it's not that big. It's a reasonably short sleeve, which when you first make it you think there's no sleeve there at all. Looks like on the pattern there's no sleeve there at all, but you can see that there is actually a reasonable amount of sleeve. Remember that the front is going to overlap, so there's that fold back there and there, and then it overlaps like that. I'll talk more about that in a minute, because you need to know what you're doing there a little bit. There he is. Come on. There we go. There we go. So I've got it doing up at the front like a shirt would, and then if we have a little look around the back, just comes down to sort of bottom area and fits quite nicely around the neck there. Who'd have thought it? Even when I did it today, when I cut it out, I was like, that's never going to look right. It's never going to fit. I should trust myself, it does. So, talking about this bit in the middle here, this centre front. So I have got the centre front marked. On the pattern, the centre front is marked. But obviously, if you make this fold on the centre front line, then when you come to put it together. So my video stopped for some reason, so I'll patch it together later. When you come to do the centre front is marked on the pattern. What you need to do is you need to fold the front so that the edge meets the centre front line. Don't fold it on the centre front line. If you fold it on the centre front line, you'll have a beautiful meeting of seams, but they won't overlap. You won't be able to put any fastenings on. So you need to fold over to the centre front line. I fold it underneath. And then what happens is, this looks really fumbly, it's because I'm looking at it through the camera. And then you'll have a nice overlap. So you need to sew that down. It looks more like a shirt then, actually, when you've sewn it down as well. Can I do that better for you? Let's take it off Dolly. Get Nuddy Dolly out the way. So you can see, can you see here? I've got a centre front mark there, and on the other side I've got centre front mark there, and and I'm not going to fold it along that centre front line, because otherwise I'll have no overlap. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in so that it meets the centre front line, and then stitch it down. And if you've cut the top around the neck according to the pattern, you won't get that little bit stuck out at the top, so that will help you fold it in the right place, because the neckline will be the same shape as the neckline on the main garment. So I need to sew that down on each side. I might just do that so you can see what it looks like. So here we go, I've sewn those two fronts over. You can see a little stitch line there, and the same underneath, there's a little stitch line there. And that fold also gives a bit of strength for the Velcro fastening, so that it's on a double layer. So that's the shirt. Shall I do a bit of stitching? There's a rolled hem hand stitch that is useful for around the neckline and possibly around the edges and the bottom. I did it on the dress. I'll do it again here in case people haven't watched the dress video. The dress video was a day when my daughter, who is 14, was really not interested in what I was doing. Sometimes she is, sometimes she isn't. And I realised after I'd done the whole thing that she wasn't really close enough to hear a lot of what I was saying, although to be fair, a amount of it was juntering. And also some of the shots weren't brilliant. So if you can't make head and a tail of the dress video, I might do it again at some point. I think there's enough there to give you an idea of what you're doing. I mean, these aren't designed to be 100% every angle covered tutorials. These are just supposed to be to give you a bit of confidence to have a go, so that you can see what things should look like and the main points really. So what I'll do now is I'll have a go at hand stitching round the neckline a little bit, so that you can see how I've done that, a way to do that. So let me thread a needle and come back to you. An attempt at showing you a rolled hem then. I've got my thread anchored in here. I left a tail underneath, see there, and I did a couple of stitches here to keep it secure. That's going nowhere. And then I'm looking through the camera lens, it's a bit weird. I'm going to have to go over the top, hopefully you can still see it. So I'm going to take a little bit of fabric in the main fabric. Let's try and get it a bit more central, close. A little bit of fabric in the main fabric there. This is where I could do with my daughter holding the phone, so you can see better. And then I kind of do a long stitch here. Can you see that? A long stitch here. And then immediately below that long stitch, you take a little bit of fabric here in the main fabric. I hope you can't hear my daughter, they're driving me nuts, the noise. They're not doing anything wrong, it's just really noisy. And then again, a long stitch up here in just the turned over fabric. This is impossible. I'm trying to do the camera and then a little stitch down here. And you can see nothing's rolling at the moment, and it's I'm not pulling it tight. I'm just doing the stitching. So a tiny bit from the. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a tiny bit in the main fabric and a longer stitch through the bit that's turned over. I'll do a couple more and then you'll see what happens when I pull it. So a long stitch up here, a long stitch up here, and that's just going through the bit that's turned over as a hem, it's not going through the other side. And then straight down from that didn't come through the other side. Straight down from that, so directly underneath that, I'm taking a tiny little stitch, which you will see on the other side, just about, but it should be just a pinprick. If you were doing it in the same colour rather than a contrast colour, it would be better. I think the demonstration of this on the doll's dress is much better, because actually that's one bit where my daughter was paying attention and holding the camera for me. So what I've got here now is a row of stitches where I've done quite a long stitch in this section, and then immediately beneath it done a tiny stitch, and then gone back up and done a big stitch in here, and then immediately beneath it a tiny stitch. And I've not pulled it very hard, I've just stitched it without it being baggy. And then when I pull it, you're going to be able to see this, when I pull it, it pulls the little hem under and makes a little rolled hem there. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever. I fully appreciate it's not the best demo of that, because it's very hard to sew while you're looking in a camera. Let's do a couple more. Let's do a couple more stitches, so see if I can get better at it. So I'm taking a long stitch up here. So I say long, relatively. So a long stitch in that section up there. And then a tiny stitch directly beneath it. So I'm coming perpendicular down underneath it. Do you know, I'm standing up, leaning at a really strange angle. My back's going to give way in a minute. There we go. And then I'm going to go back up again and take a longer stitch up here. So I'm going in quite close to the previous stitch. A longer stitch up there and a tiny one at the bottom. A longer stitch up there and a tiny stitch at the bottom. Okay, so this looks better actually. You can see better what's going on, I think. There, this is what it looks like. They look like little pairs of stitches. So that started at the top and came down. I did a tiny stitch, I went back in at the top, did a long stitch, came back perpendicularly down, took a tiny stitch, went back up and did a long stitch to where I am now. And then when I pull this, I don't know if I can pull it so that you can see it or whether I'm going to have to move it. When I pull it, what it does is it gives you a beautifully little rolled hem. There you go. That's the best I can do with the technology I have at the moment. I'm sure there are plenty of other tutorials online where it's much clearer. You're looking for rolled hem, hand-stitched rolled hem. I hope that's helpful. I think that's everything dolly related now. Hurrah!